How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and it is that time of year. We are only a couple of days away from the actual NHL Draft, so here is my final mock draft for this year. I also have a full 7-round mock that I've done here, so I'm really just only going to walk through the first round of picks, but at the end I'm going to show the entire list of picks for each team so that you guys can kind of take a look at kind of the draft strategy that I had for each one. So without further ado, we'll get started with the first overall pick. The San Jose Sharks are obviously going to be selecting Macklin Celebrini. He's such a great, well-rounded player, somebody who plays offense extremely well, somebody who's going to be extremely useful on the back check. He's got the physicality. He's just got every tool that he needs to be a good NHL player. Now, I'm not necessarily sold that his ceiling is the highest in this draft, and we'll talk about some of those players later, but he is one of the only guys in this draft that will walk in day one and make an immediate impact, I believe, and that makes him a very compelling first overall pick, and I do have him ranked first overall. As you'll see as we go through, I'll have my ranking at the bottom. That's going to differ from what the actual pick is going to be, because in this mock draft I'm just trying to predict the pick more so than try and say what I would do here. But in this case, I would certainly be picking Macklin Celebrini first overall. You don't get a guy with his speed, his shooting, his playmaking, his defensive skills come around very often at such a young age. So he's going to step in and make an immediate impact for the San Jose Sharks. With the second overall pick, the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be selecting Artyom Levshinov. That is my prediction. It's not necessarily what I would do here. I don't think he's necessarily the second best player available. Personally, I don't think he's the best defenseman available either, but that doesn't matter too much. I think he's a great fit for the Blackhawks, so if they did go this direction like they are rumored to, then I would actually, I do think it would be a really good pick. I think it addresses a need that they have, and I think Levshinov is a great prospect. I have his projected role as being a top pairing 2-way defenseman, but as you can see, overall on my total list, I do have him as my 6th overall best player. With the third overall pick, we got the Anaheim Ducks selecting Caden Lindstrom. I think this is a really intriguing pick. Obviously, we just heard about the injury news with him, that the reason he missed, basically half the season this year was due to a herniated disc. I've seen kind of contradictory reports on how detrimental that could be to his future health. So really, I don't know what to believe, whether or not it's going to affect him or not long term. But what I will say is, when you just watch the player and you see how good he was this past season in the film, I mean, very rarely do you have a player of his size at his age that's as fast and as skilled as he is. He's got the physicality. He's a great puck handler. Just overall, just a unique skill set. And something that the Anaheim Ducks don't really have at this point is that kind of power forward to play in their top 6 amongst all these really good skill guys. I guess Cutter Gauthier does play a bit of a power role, but he's not quite the size of Lindstrom. So I think that just adds another wrinkle to that future offense that is just going to be so fun and interesting to watch out of Anaheim. I do have him as my 4th overall player, but I love this fit too much to go anywhere else. Next up, we've got the 4th overall pick, and it's the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I do think there's a possibility that they do pass on Demidov, but I would be really surprised. I do notice that I don't have my projected role there. He will be a first-line playmaking winger. That is my projected role for him. And he is my 2nd overall prospect. He just reminds me a lot of Nikita Kucherov. The way that he can stick handle through all the defenders in the MHL this season, it was fantastic to see. I don't think he'll be able to come over right away just because he still is under contract for another year, and that's not the worst thing in the world. It'll give him another year to develop. Although we could see him potentially, just like Michkov just did, find a way to get out of his contract and come over right away. And if that were the case, then I think Columbus would be happy to get him as soon as possible. Like I said, I do think there is a possibility that he falls past here just because of the unknown Russian factor. But I think if you ignore that, and you should ignore that, really there's no reason he should be still available at 4. He should be the second player taken off the board. But from a realistic standpoint, this is kind of the realistic spot that I see for him. With the 5th overall pick, we got the Montreal Canadiens selecting Tij Ginla. Now, this is one where we're going to start to see my rankings and what I think is actually going to happen differ a little bit. I haven't been as high as most people on a Ginla throughout the season. Now, I do think that there's a lot of upside for him to be a really good player. And I do think that if Montreal makes this pick, it definitely wouldn't be a bad pick. I just think that as far as, I think the upside is really high, but I think that there's no guarantee really that he gets there. I think that there's going to be a fair bit of a learning curve with him coming to the next level, because while I do think he's a super talented player, I do think that he's got really good offensive IQ and that the production was great, and at times he shows flashes of really good talent, but there's other times where some of the lack of passing ability does fail him a little bit, where he identifies what the right pass is to make and then he just kind of fails to connect on it. So it's going to be a little bit of working on that side of his game. And also, people mention his physical game. I think what is good about his physical game is he's not a player that shies away from contact, and he's a guy who will certainly bounce off of it, but he's not a guy who necessarily goes out of his way to seek it either. So, just one of those things that I don't necessarily agree with the consensus on there. Not that that's a huge deal. Obviously, he doesn't need to be a physical player to have a great impact. He's a great skater as well. Overall, I do think that he's going to be a good player at the NHL level. Like I said here, he's a high upside middle six winger is what I think he's going to become. I don't see him being kind of that elite top line type of player. And my overall ranking for him, I have him at 13th. With the 6th overall pick, I got the Utah Hockey Club selecting Berkeley Catton. Catton's a little bit of a hard guy to place here because there's not a lot of teams near the top that are looking for his style of finesse winger type play, but there's no reason why he should drop out of the top 10 either. I mean, when you look at the production, you look at the tape, he is a really highly skilled player. Who, in a lot of ways should translate to the NHL. The one knock that I do have against him is that he is very much a perimeter player, which is great in the junior level, but it's going to be a lot harder to be primarily a perimeter guy at the NHL level and still have that same kind of success. So he's going to have to find a way to work down low, work in the cycle game. When rushes break down, is he going to be able to make something out of it? So that's kind of the next step for Berkeley Catton. I like the fit for Utah because obviously they got Logan Cooley. They got guys like Logan Schmaltz still there who's playing well for them. But, the ceiling for Logan Schmaltz certainly isn't long-term first-line center. Maybe Cooley is. Maybe eventually Berkeley Catton becomes your second-line center. That's kind of what I have him as his role here, is playmaking second-line center. And Schmaltz is a guy who can play the wing too, so it's not like I'm saying they got to move on from him, because I think he's been pretty good for them in his time there. Just kind of Utah's in a situation where they have so many draft picks this year, and they had so many last year, where they're really in a best player available type of situation. And when they're sitting there, they really are a team that has the luxury of being able to pick a guy like Berkeley Catton. With the 7th pick, we've got the Ottawa Senators selecting Zane Parekh. The Senators are looking to address the right-hand side of their defense. Obviously, they've been running Jacob Chychrun on the right side, and they found that didn't work out very well for them this year, so they're looking to move him. They're looking to find his eventual replacement. Ottawa's likely to address the right side of the defense in free agency on a short-term basis while they wait for whoever they pick at 7th to potentially develop, if that's the direction they want to go. And I think Zane Parekh is, you can see there how highly I think of him. He's my 3rd overall ranked prospect, and I am definitely somewhat alone in my belief that he's that good compared to other people who are in the scouting community. A lot of people have him outside of the top 10. I've seen as low as like 18th or 19th because the big knock on him, coming from other people is his lack of defense. I think that's a bit of a lazy narrative. I don't want to call people out on it because, I'm sure a lot of people have definitely done their homework, but my issue with that is that you're talking about a player who plays in the Ontario Hockey League and you're looking at him and you're expecting him to look like an NHL defenseman right now. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to say because obviously from an offensive standpoint, he does look like an NHL defenseman. He looks like he could step in and play offense in the NHL right now. Obviously, the defense is going to take still a little bit of work, but he still, shows a lot of skill. He's really good with the stick. He shows occasional flashes of physicality, but I think he could definitely use to, gain from working on the physical side of his game a bit more. Board battles and such behind his own net could use a little bit of work. Part of defense as well is being a great breakout guy, and he is a great breakout guy because the game just looks slow to him. He's not necessarily a particularly fast skater, but when he has the puck on his stick, everybody else on the ice looks slow because he can almost play the game in slow motion. It's so amazing to see. His vision is just incredible. He shows good gap control on defense. He, like I said, stick positioning has been really good. So there is a lot of traits there to make him, projectable at the next level as a defenseman. It might take a year or two for him to get there, but I really do think that with the offense, the offensive talent that he has, the sky is really the limit with him. I really do think that he can be an elite defenseman at the next level. Because in a lot of ways, he even reminds me of Evan Bouchard when he was coming out because a lot of his traits were very similar. Next up, we've got the 8th overall pick when we got the Seattle Kraken selecting the towering defenseman Anton Saleyev. With Seattle, my kind of rationale here, and I think I've mocked him to them every chance that I've gotten, it's because they really have every single type of prospect in their prospect pool that they're really going to need. But what they do not have, aside from obviously they have veteran defenseman Jamie Alexiak, who is very much the same way, but what they don't have in their prospect pool is that towering shutdown defenseman, and that's exactly what Anton Saleyev is. I mean, when I watched his highlights this season, obviously I didn't care much for his offensive highlights because, that's not really his game. But defensively, I mean, the way that he would shut down these elite pro-level KHL players with ease was just really fantastic to watch. And, he uses his physicality really well. He's, he closes off the boards really quickly when guys come down the wing. I really think that the fit in Seattle there is so good. Obviously, he's one of the more polarizing guys in the draft because some people have him as low as like in the 20s. Some people have him as the second best player in the draft. I think, what you got to realize with him is you can't expect offense. I don't think the offense is going to translate because it's really not his game. And it's not terrible either because, he is a guy who just makes the smart decision with the puck. He doesn't try to overcomplicate things, which is good, and I like that in a good shutdown defender. But I think, he's going to be so valuable and worth this pick just off of his defense alone. With the 9th overall pick, the Calgary Flames, I have them selecting Zeev Boyum. So with Boyum, or with the Flames specifically, they've got to do some work on reconstructing the left-hand side of their defense. Obviously, they did a good job bringing in Kevin Ball. I do like that pickup for them. I think that, he's got definitely a good defensive shutdown upside to his game. So now you can go out and look at a guy who's a bit more offensive, try and replace Noah Hannafin long term. And I think Zeev Boyum was the best option to try and do that. He showed great flashes of being a puck mover this season, and obviously was the highest point scoring defenseman in the NCAA this year. So I think that this is a really good fit for Calgary. Next up, we've got the New Jersey Devils, and I have them selecting Cole Yzerman, who I am still very high on despite the consensus, because you don't get guys who can score like that coming in the draft very often. The main knock on him, as I've said previously in other videos, and that people keep talking about, is his lack of playmaking ability, and I think that's just missing the mark a little bit, because if you really watch his highlights, you will sometimes see flashes of these really great passes from him. The issue isn't that he can't do it, it's more just that he doesn't do it very often right now, but the fact that he shows these flashes takes away any concerns that I really have from him of not being able to pass at the next level, and it more becomes a teammate utilization issue with Cole Yzerman rather than a passing ability question mark. So with that being said, if he can still pass at a very high level and he can score at the highest of high levels like he has, then he should certainly still be a top 10 prospect. Now, the one thing I will say is there's a possibility that he will play better as a guy who doesn't have to drive the offense. He'll be a better finisher, obviously, at the next level. That's why New Jersey is such a good fit, is because the potential of him playing with Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, guys who are such good passers and playmakers in the future, I could see him really exploding if this is the location that he ends up in. Next up, we've got the 11th overall pick, and we got the Buffalo Sabres selecting Carter Yakimchuk, because for as good as the Buffalo Sabres defense of the future is starting to look, the way they're building it, there's not a lot on the right-hand side of their defense right now, and that's why we got Carter Yakimchuk coming in. Carter Yakimchuk adds a really physical element. He was one of the most physical defensemen in this entire draft. He really seeks out big open ice hits, and I think that's a good addition for Buffalo to have. On top of that, he shows really good offensive skill as well. He's one of the best stick handlers overall in this draft, not just defensemen, including the forwards. He has some of the best dangles you'll see if you go watch his highlights. And he's also a really great shooter, so he activates off the point really well. So he's going to be another good offensive option for them. Now, obviously, I think Buffalo would like him to maybe be a bit more defensive with the way they're starting to construct their defense, because Byram and Dahlin and Power, they're all a little bit more offensive than defensive, so perhaps that would sway them away from looking at Yakimchuk, because defense is definitely something he's going to have to work on. But I also think in the next 2 or 3 years that it's going to take him to develop and get there anyways, that the defense is going to come along for him, especially a player that physical and that strong. There's a good base level to work with to try and develop him into a more defensive player in the future. Next up, we've got the 12th overall pick with the Philadelphia Flyers, and I know people are going to be saying, why do you have him ranked 17th? A lot of people say he's a top 10 defenseman in this draft. I don't know. I'm just not totally sold on Sam Dickinson. I'd be surprised if he falls any further than here. I think the Flyers would be probably a good fit. Potentially he and Oliver Bonk would get to remain as teammates, which would be awesome. But yeah, there's just something, I don't know, like looking at the analytics, Elite Prospects, if you have their draft guide, it's great to look at. It's a great tool for kind of looking at these players more. I thought he was a lot better defensively when watching him compared to what kind of the analytics say. So it's hard to really know what's more correct there. But he's kind of an average defender at the OHL level, not a great one. And people are using that as kind of one of his main kind of upsides is how reliable he is defensively. I think he still will be, and I think that maybe the analytics aren't, a perfect indicator of that. But I think there are more question marks than people realize with what the potential upside of a guy like Sam Dickinson is. And on top of that, I'm not a huge fan of his offensive side to his game. I don't think that it's super developed, and I think that, while the production was good from him, I was happy with his overall numbers. Obviously, he played well from an offensive standpoint, but when you actually watch the tape, it's not particularly projectable to the next level, in my opinion. But I know a lot of people are going to be upset about that. I know we're going to get comments about that one. But at the 12th overall pick, I think that's where he's going to end up. That's where the hype is for a guy like him. And I do think that there is definitely upside for him to be a good second pairing defenseman, but he's just not going to be like a franchise changer or game changer like a lot of people seem to think. With the 13th overall pick, we got the Minnesota Wild selecting Michael Bronseg-Nygaard from Norway. I like this fit a lot because the only other Norwegian player in the NHL right now is playing for the Minnesota Wild. So this is a guy who would potentially get to be mentored by Matt Zuccarello, a Norwegian hockey legend. And overall, I just think there's no reason why he should fall any further than this. So this is just kind of the right range for him. I think Minnesota will kind of identify that that's probably a good fit, and he'd be a good player to slot into their middle six for the long-term future. I actually have him ranked 10th, so a little bit higher than this. I just couldn't find any way to fit him in ahead of here. A lot of people don't think that he's necessarily going to be this high, although this is kind of the range where he's expected to go. Next up, we've got the 14th overall pick, the second one for the San Jose Sharks, and I got them selecting one of the biggest risers in this draft, Beckett Sennecke, who one of the main reasons why he did rise so much partially was because he had this massive growth spurt from like 5'10" to 6'2". And then he showed all this flash and talent and finesse over mostly the second half of this OHL season, and especially in the playoffs, where he was very good for Oshawa. I think that, when you look at San Jose's depth chart and prospects, they've done a really good job drafting, centers. They seem to have that pretty well figured out. The left wingers as well. They got Musty coming. They've got guys like Danil Gushin. I think Bordelot will probably end up playing the wing. So, that kind of those kinds of players. Defense is still something that they need to address, although I don't love, once you get out of all the defensemen that we've already had picked here, I don't love the upside if you're looking for a potential number one of the future, you're not going to get him at this point, so you might as well just kind of wait until the second or wait until, the end of the first to look at defensemen at this point. And Beckett Sennecke was kind of the best player available that kind of fit the criteria that I was looking for, that San Jose would potentially be interested in. Next up, we've got the Detroit Red Wings selecting Trevor Connolly, and this is definitely the highest that I've had him go so far with these mock drafts. Obviously, he's one of the more controversial players in this draft, but the skill is undeniable. And when I look at Detroit, they are really desperately needing some sort of change in that top six that is going to propel them into being an offensive juggernaut, because they've done a good job drafting on the defense. They've really plugged a lot of holes through free agency on offense, and it hasn't really worked out as well. So I think that this is maybe a risk that they have to take, is on a high upside playmaking winger who really does have the potential to propel a guy like Raymond or DeBrincat into being, perennial 40-plus goal scorers every single season. So I like the fit there from a skill standpoint. Next up, we got the St. Louis Blues selecting Liam Greentree, adding a little bit of size and skill. He's a guy who really has all the tools. The one concern is just, can he become a better skater? Even if not, I think there's still a good chance of him being a good player at the next level. Obviously, the size is really going to work in his favor, and he's a guy with really good stick handling skills. So I think that he makes sense going in this range and would definitely fit the Blues' future here. Next up, we've got the Washington Capitals. I have them selecting Cole Hudson. I think this is pretty early for Cole Hudson. I think that, as an overall defenseman, definitely the defense will need some improvement. It's going to take him some time to get to the next level, but the offensive skills are definitely there, and Washington is definitely at a point where they need to be looking at rebuilding that defense. They really need to be rebuilding everything. Washington's kind of in a tough spot right now where, they're on the edge of being a playoff team, I would say. They barely made it this year and didn't really do much with their opportunity. And they don't really have a lot of opportunities to sell off veterans because they're not going to trade Ovechkin. Ovechkin's going to stay a Washington Capital until he retires. They're stuck with a few contracts. The Tom Wilson contract is going to look a little bit rough in a few years, I do believe. And they're stuck with Oshie until he retires as well. Not necessarily a bad thing. They got their cup. They can kind of ride out their careers at this point, but it's going to leave them in a bit of an awkward spot where they're just a mediocre team that can't sell off their older players and rebuild properly. So anyways, there's definitely a lot of things they could address here, but I think getting a good dynamic puck moving offensive defenseman like Cole Hudson would definitely suit the direction that they're heading in. Next up, we've got the second pick here for the Chicago Blackhawks at 18th overall. They get Konsta Helenius, who I would say they'd be very lucky if he did drop to them here. But when looking at fits, it was kind of hard to find a good fit for him, before this. Obviously he's a really good two-way player, well-rounded, showed good flashes of offense this year in Liga, and I think he would really benefit this rebuilding Chicago Blackhawks team. He can play center or the wing, so there's really flexibility there for him to play anywhere kind of in the top 9, in either an offensive role or even in a penalty killing role. Obviously with his size, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be this checking third line forward, but he brings skill and speed to that probably middle 6, but I think there's even a possibility that he could be a first line player. I think there's just a range of, you could use him in so many different situations that he's worth the pick, and you just kind of figure out what he's going to be later on. Next up, we've got the 19th overall pick. We got the Vegas Golden Knights selecting Nikita Arnamonov. This is one that I've really liked mocking, is him here. I think I've had this in most of my mock drafts. He's a really good forechecking winger, works really hard, got to play a lot of KHL games this year, so he's pretty close to NHL ready, I would say. I don't think that there's this super high upside with him, but I do think that he could slot in and be a third line winger pretty much right away, and I think that's kind of what Vegas is looking for right now. They have a lot of their top 6 guys locked in long term, and they just need guys who can fill out the depth and play well and help them be competitive in the playoffs again. Next up, we have the 20th overall pick. We got the New York Islanders selecting Michael Hage, dynamic offensive centerman playing for the Chicago Steel. Is going to be at the University of Michigan next season. He had great production this year, showed a lot of great playmaking skill, and I think that that's kind of something that the Islanders are needing, is just an infusion of high talent youth coming into their squad in the near future. Next up, we got the Los Angeles Kings selecting Emil Hemming. They've definitely been lacking. They don't have a lot of right-handed forwards on the roster right now. So long term, they'd be looking to get a guy of his offensive talents in on that side. So I like that fit there. He's a great shooter. He's got a high motor. So I think that he's a guy who would definitely fit in their top 6 in the future. Next up, we've got the Nashville Predators making one of the more interesting selections of this first round with Stein Solberg, who really boosted his stock with a really great World Championships. He played really well defensively against some of the top teams in the tournament, including Canada. And one of the biggest things with him is he is very, very physical. Some people are calling him the most physical player in this draft, and It's easy to see why. He throws really punishing hits, but he doesn't get caught out of position too often when throwing them, which is really impressive. And good gap control, those kinds of things. I don't think that there's a lot of upside as an offensive player at the next level, but that being said, he's not bad with the puck either. He's got really great agility. I think he actually was the leader in all the agility drills at the Combine, and it's easy to see why when you watch him on tape. The way that he can move side to side is just unlike really most players you'll see. So I think there's a lot of really good tools there that will make him a really solid defenseman, and I think he's actually really close to NHL ready, as he proved at the World Championships. He showed a lot of that he could shut down some of the best players out there, and he threw a hit on Colton Parayko, who's a pretty big guy, has proven that he can really hang with the big boys. Next up, we've got the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I have them selecting E.J. Emery. I would say he would be the second best pure defensive defenseman in this draft behind Saleev, and Solberg would be pretty close, but I think E.J. Emery is just a little bit better as a defensive guy. Obviously, you're not going to get a whole lot out of him as a offensive or two-way type defenseman. He will be more pure defensive, but his gap control is fantastic, potentially even better than Saleev's. And he uses his physicality when he needs to along the boards to try and close guys out. I really see a good fit for him playing alongside Morgan Rielly for the long-term future, allowing him to take more chances and leave Emery back to handle the potential odd man rushes if need be. So that's why I like that pick with Toronto. Next up, we got the Colorado Avalanche taking Teddy Stiga. He is kind of known for being a really high IQ type of player, just making really smart plays in both ends of the ice. So I think that's something that Colorado could really use. He's probably only a couple years away from being NHL ready, and he's a guy who can kill penalties for you in the future. So, there's a lot of upside for him kind of in this range for Colorado. Next up, we got the Boston Bruins with one of my favorite players in this draft, Igor Surin, just a really high motor, really physical guy who shows a lot of offensive upside in the MHL, although there is a bit of question about whether that'll be translatable at the next level. But at the very least, I do think that he's going to be a guy that you can rely on to be a penalty killer because he loves to block shots, and he's always got his stick active in lanes, and guy who can just really be a good defensive shutdown center for you, and he has flexibility. He can play on the wing. Next up, we got the Montreal Canadiens selecting Sacha Boisvert. So with Boisvert, he is a good offensive centerman. Got good two-way game to him as well. The one question mark with him is just his skating ability. But if he does improve that, I do see him being a good middle six center of the future. And, I like the fit there with Montreal Canadiens long term. Next up, we got one of my more interesting selections, I would say, here, because I don't think a lot of people are going to have Jesse Pulkkinen in their first round, and honestly, I don't have him ranked in my first round, but the more I thought about it, the more I really liked this fit for the Carolina Hurricanes. They're going to need to start rebuilding that defense a little bit. Obviously, they're probably going to be losing Pesce this year, might be losing Brady Shea as well. So there's a few things that just kind of have to be addressed on that defense. They have Scott Morrow coming in, who looked really good in college, and I'm sure he'll have an impact pretty much right away. And so I was starting to think about who would be a really good partner for a good offensive right-handed defenseman like Scott Morrow. And the more I thought about it, the more I liked this Jesse Pulkkinen pick. The big, sizey, 1 year over draft eligible, so he was draft eligible last year but missed his draft. But he showed more growth this year than most players who were drafted last year. Even some of the guys who were drafted in the first round, he showed a lot of offensive great skating ability at the top level in Finland. So I think this is a guy who's worth a first round pick. I think he's close to being NHL ready, which is kind of what you're looking for with these guys near the end of the first round. Is do they have a lot of upside, and are they close to being ready for the next level, because these are teams who are kind of trying to replace their veteran players sooner rather than later. And so that's why I like the fit here for the Carolina Hurricanes. Next up, we got the Calgary Flames selecting Ryder Ritchie. He is a good dynamic winger. I like his skill. His production dipped off a little bit from what we were expecting from him this year, so that's why he falls a bit. I've even had him at times ranked as a second-round player, but I do like the skill. When I watch the highlights, I'm impressed with the player. And I do think that he does have upside to be somewhere in the middle six. I think he could use to develop a bit more of a defensive game and a bit more of a physical game potentially that would help him play potentially a third line role if the skill does become a bit limited. But I do like the upside, and I do think that there is good opportunity for him to become a good NHL player. And I think that Calgary's just kind of looking for whoever they can find best player available at this point in the draft. Next up, we got the Dallas Stars selecting Henry Muse. Now, I think Muse is a fair bit better than this, selection, because I do have him ranked 21st and I have him going 29th. But there has been a bit of in the scouting community, a lot of people have been low on him, at least in the second half of the season. I found that his offensive production got better in the second half of the season, but when he was focusing on his offense, his defense started to dip, and I did like him more defensively coming into this year. That being said, I still think the upside is really good. Obviously, as we've seen, he does have the ability to be both offensive and defensive. I think it'll just kind of come down to how he's coached at the next level, what they want him to be. And I think the fit for him to go to Dallas and just add to the defensive depth there, that's kind of more of a need right now, I would say, than adding more offensive players. Next up, we got another one of my favorite players in this draft, Cole Beaudoin. And again, it's not because he's a high-end skill-type player. He's a guy who, for me, is one of the most guaranteed NHL players in this entire draft, because he works so hard every single shift. He is physical, and he is so smart defensively. And there is a bit of offense to his game, but I don't necessarily expect the offense to super translate to the next level. I just expect him to be the ideal third-line center. And with the Rangers, they got rid of Barclay Goodrow's contract. They kind of need a third-line center of the long-term future, and that's why I love the Cole Beaudoin pick. And you look at the Rangers; they've been so close, the past few years. Losing in the conference final this year. Cole Beaudoin is the type of guy that helps you win in the playoffs, because he comes up big for you in the defensive minutes in the big games. Next up, we got the Anaheim Ducks, and this is, again, one of my favorite picks, not necessarily because of the player specifically, but because we get to reunite the dynamic duo of Andrew Basha and Caden Lindstrom from the Medicine Hat Tigers. They played so well together and showed such great chemistry that it would be a shame if they don't end up together at the next level. With Basha, he's a really great playmaker, really good hands, good shooting ability too. Just a guy who has the upside of being a good offensive winger at the next level in the NHL. And last in the first round, we got the Philadelphia Flyers, and we have them selecting Igor Chernyshov. Great forechecking winger, just high motor and good skill as well. Somebody who I think would fit in really well with the Flyers in the future. All right, so we're going to go quickly through our draft summary here. We got Anaheim and Boston here first. We're going to talk about Anaheim first. So we've already talked about Lindstrom and Basha. They get Adam Juracek falling to them in the second round. Obviously, like I've said before, he's one of the guys that I'm not as high on as everyone else, and I think the NHL is going to start to lean that way as well, just looking at the injury history. But he still goes early in the second round, and I do think there's still good upside with him. Next season's going to be really crucial in his development. Topias Heinonen, a good two-way forward from Finland. They got Heikki Ruohonen. They got Kasper Pikkarainen. So I did go with a lot of Finns for Anaheim. Just kind of happened that way. Thomas Mrsic, Leon Mugli, and Matvei Korotki. Then we've got Boston. Obviously, we already talked about Igor Surin. Then their next pick's not till 122. They get Ethan Precision, a guy who showed good upside this year for the North Bay Battalion, but will kind of get more of an opportunity next season to kind of be a leader on that team offensively. 154th, we got Elliot Gronwald, and 186, Samuel Kupik. So just adding a couple of defensemen there to try and bolster their prospect pool. Looking at Buffalo, their second-round pick is Sam O'Reilly, a good two-way forward winger out of the London Knights, adding a bit of size on the right-hand side of defense with Adam Kleber. Then they get a size forward with Tyler McInnes-Thorpe out of the Vancouver Giants. Ollie Josephson from Red Deer, a good speedy two-way forward winger. James Reeder out of the USHL, Laurie Sinvorori, and Brendan McMorrow from the US Development Program. Looking at the Calgary Flames, we obviously talked about Zeev Boyum and Ryder Ritchie, but then they get one of my favorite potential steals in this draft in Jakob Fibiger, a guy who I was watching film for other players, and he just kind of popped out to me. As I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the Mississauga Steelheads, and I'm thinking I forgot to put Luke Misa on a team, but Luke Misa should definitely be somewhere in the early second round. I think I just kind of forgot about him. But yeah, Jakob Fibiger, really good skater, deceptive at the blue line, likes to make guys miss and then, come down the wall and either pass in front or cut to the net. He had some really good highlights that I like this year. Harrison Brunicky, a more defensive right-handed defenseman who, has been pretty popular on some scouts lists and would be great for Calgary if he fell to them there. Same with John Mustard, another guy that a lot of scouts have liked and had it sometimes in the tail end of the first round. Just a good goal-scoring centerman out of the USHL. Jacob Battaglia, a power forward from the Kingston Frontenacs. Eric Matejko, a Latvian power forward out of the QMJHL. Miroslav Shatan, one of the biggest forwards in this draft at 6'7" out of Czechia. And Zaki Crooks, a Swedish forward. We've got the Carolina Hurricanes. We already talked about Pulkkinen. We got Alexander Zetterberg, an undersized but very talented offensive player. Vidi Väisänen, a reliable defenseman from Finland. Wojtek Hradek, Timofey Julin, John Whipple, Alexei Dontsov, and Luke Ellenash. Going on to Chicago, we got Artyom Levchinov and Konsta Helenius, who we already talked about. Tarek Periskak, who had great production for Prince George this year. Justin Poirier, one of the best pure goal scorers in this draft, but only standing at 5'8". Danil Ustinkov, a reliable Swiss defenseman. Tori Pintner, another defenseman. And a 20-year-old goalie, Ilya Nabokov, out of Russia, who played very well in the KHL this year. Next up, we got Colorado. We already talked about Teddy Stigo. We got Marcus Gidloff, a goalie. Artyom Shutchinov, a guy who played well in the KHL this year, a defenseman. Matthias Milovsky, an overager from the QMJHL, but a guy who potentially would be able to play at the next level pretty quickly. Jake Fisher out of the USHL, and Preston Loonsbury out of the QMJHL. Then we got Columbus. We got Ivan Demidov, who we already talked about. Pavel Moisevich, a Belarusian goalie who played very well in the KHL this year. Thomas Galvis, a bit of an undersized defenseman who does show a lot of skill offensively. Linus Eriksson, a good two-way centerman. Carl Sterner and Juho Kaininen. We got Dallas, who only had 3 picks in this draft, unless I made a mistake. Henry Muse, Anton Olsen, and Gavin Hodnett. Gavin Hodnett was a good or decent player for the Edmonton Oil Kings this season. Detroit, we got Trevor Connolly, who we already talked about. Leo Salin Wallenius, one of the better defensemen available in the second round. Thomas Suoniemi, who had a good recent under-18 tournament. I liked seeing him there. Paul Mayer, a German defenseman. Philip Shatar from Slovenia. Ilya Pautov, Daniel Schlein, and another Slovenian, Ojbe Rep, who played in Sweden this year and was very solid. Edmonton, we got Kim Saarinen, goalie, as Edmonton's first pick in the second round there. Alexis Bernier and Will Scahan, a couple of right-handed defensemen. Braden Edwards, an overager, or I think just missed his draft year by 1 year, out of Lethbridge. And a London Knights defenseman, Jared Woolley. Florida, we got Raul Boyard as their first pick in the third round, 97th overall, playing in the Quebec League this year. Fyodor Avramov, a bit of a sizey Russian forward. Maximilian Kurin, playmaking center who played in the WHL this year. Blake Montgomery out of the USHL, and big towering defenseman Gabriel Eliasson, who I had them selecting with the final pick of the draft. We've got the Los Angeles Kings. We had Emil Hemming. Then we got Emil Vini, goaltender that they picked with the 118th pick. Peter Sikora, no, not related to the other Peter Sikora that played in the NHL. And Nate Miskey, a right-handed defenseman from, I believe, the Victoria Royals. Minnesota, we got Michael Bronseg-Nygard, and then I have them doubling up on wingers with Brody Zemer, but I had to give Minnesota a Minnesota player in that range. 110th, Taryn Smith, a high upside offensive defenseman from the WHL. We got Andre Becker, a 19-year-old, I believe, player from the Prince George Cougars, who played quite well this year. Misha Jokinen, defenseman from Finland, and Clemens Sager, a German forward, going there. Next up, we've got the Montreal Canadiens. They had Tiji Ginla and Sasha Boisvert in their first round, and I realized that I wrote his name correctly here, but I think I put it with a C when I put it before, so that's my bad on that. It is Sasha with an S. 57th overall, we got them taking reliable defensive defenseman Ben Danford. Then we've got Julius Miettinen, who's a good playmaking center from the WHL. Then I have them taking a guy who a lot of people are high on, maybe think he might go in the tail end of the first round, Dean Letourneau. But I think he's a fairly raw prospect. He's a 6'7" forward. He played at St. Andrews College this year in Canadian high school. So I think it'll be a bit of a long development curve with him, but there is a lot of raw talent there to work with. So getting him there would be, maybe potentially a steal. 102nd overall, we got Miroslav Halinka. 130th, Alexis Michaud. 166th, Quinn Kennedy. 198th, we got them taking a goalie, Jan Kavan. And 210th, AJ Spalacy from Windsor. And 224th, 5'9" centerman Adam Tittlebach. Nashville, we've got Stein Solberg with the first pick. We got Simon Zether, who I was higher on for most of the year because he got a lot of SHL experience this year. But it was mostly in kind of a checking shutdown type of role. So, potentially it was good experience for him. So it'll be interesting kind of to see, where he ends up next year and what kind of role he takes on. Alexander Blais, a high-scoring forward from the QMJHL. William Zellers, a high-scoring forward from United States High School. We got Nathan Villeneuve, ultimate third-line type of center build from the Sudbury Wolves. Just, good combination of skill and just feistiness. And then Anthony Cristoforo from the Oshawa Generals, right-handed defenseman. Oshawa or Windsor, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's actually Windsor he played for. Then Thomas Lavoie, big right-handed defenseman from the QMJHL, and Luca Cloutier, goalie for the Chicago Steel. Got the New Jersey Devils one here. So Cole Eiserman was the first pick. We got Matvei Sharavin, a good defenseman from the KHL. I heard somebody explain him as being a guy who played better in the KHL than he did in Russian Junior, which is, you can make with that what you will. Benjamin Rauschinen, a Finnish forward. Gabriel Frasca from the Kingston Frontenacs. Nicholas Kempf, goalie for the U.S. National Development Team. And Franz Hara, a Swedish defenseman. We've got New York Islanders. We already talked about Michael Hage. We got 54th overall. An interesting player to watch for this draft, Colin Ralph. Big two-way defenseman from United States High School who I think has a fair bit of upside. Then we got Austin Baker, Austin Bernovic, and Xavier Veilleux for the Islanders. For the Rangers, I got Cole Baudouin in the first round. Then they don't pick again until 127. They get William Felicio. Then they draft Lucas Van Vliet from the U.S. Development Program and goaltender Theodore Munther with their final pick. with the Rangers, I just wanted to throw a goaltender in there just on the off chance that contract talks don't go well with Shesterkin, but I'm assuming they will. With Ottawa, we got Zane Parekh, second-round pick. Melvin Fernstrom, good goal-scoring right winger. 104th, Javon Moore, a good power forward out of U.S. high school. We got Tanner Adams, who was actually playing at Providence College this past season, and I thought was going to get drafted last season. Did not, then went on to have a good season this year in college. I got Ilya Protas, the brother of the Washington Capitals forward Protas, and he was playing in the USHL this year. And then you got big center, maybe winger from the Sudbury Wolves, Kieran Walton. For Philadelphia, we got Sam Dickinson first, Igor Chernyshov second, and then in the second round we got Tanner Howe, a really good, even though he's undersized, very physical forechecking type winger, who I like a lot. Then we got Matvei Gridin, who was the top scorer in the USHL this year. Hagen Burrows, who also had a good season, I think, between US high school and the USHL. We got Swiss center Robin Nico Antonin, QMJHL winger Justin Gendron, US high school defenseman Jack Sullivan, Ottawa 67's defenseman Frankie Morelli, and Portland Winterhawks forward Diego Butazzoni. Then we've got the Pittsburgh Penguins with Kamil Bednarik and Christian Humphreys, a pair of U.S. development team teammates with their first two picks there in the second round. Then Timur Cole, a Russian defenseman, big defenseman from, I believe, the BCHL, I think it's the BCHL, Luke Ashton. USHL, 5'7", but I think he was a playoff MVP, Max Swanson. And then Caden Lee with their final pick. Then we got the San Jose Sharks, who had a big haul where they got Macklin Celebrini, Beckett Sinecki in the first round. Then they get the best goalie in the draft with Carter George, the first pick of the second round. And then they get Alphonse Fry, who's a defenseman that other people are much higher on than I am. I think that this is a better range for him to go. Oscar Volet, good Swedish forward, had a good under-18 tournament. Aiden Park, good high school player in the States. Colton Roberts, a good right-handed defenseman. Marco Mignosa, a 1 year past his draft eligible but good two-way forward winger. Daros Ulyanskis, good Latvian defenseman playing in Sweden. And Stepan Gorbanov from Russia. Then we've got the Seattle Kraken, who take Anton Saleyev in the first round. Then the top QMJHL forward in this draft, Maxim Massé. Then they get U.S. Development Program centerman Max Plant. In the third round, they get Marcus Lopinen, Carson Wetch, a good two-way forward out of the Calgary Hitmen. Then they've got Evan Gardner from the Saskatoon Blades, who was a good goalie for them this year and should get more of a role this year. Then they take Danish forward Hjalte Krusha Thompson, then Hiroki Goshik, and Thomas DeRousseau. St. Louis, I have them taking Aaron Kiviharju in the second round, who obviously due to injury was not able to showcase his skills this year, but based off of what we've seen in the past, he's obviously worth taking a pick on, and was going to be potentially one of the top players in the first round this year. So we'll see how he recovers after his injury. Obviously, I'm assuming it set him back a little bit, but dynamic playmaking kind of defenseman, so interesting to see what will happen at the next level with him. Lucas Pettersson, good two-way centerman out of Sweden. Eric Berger, a Swedish defenseman, two-way type player. Sebastian Soini, right-handed defensive defenseman out of Finland. Clark Caswell from the Swift Current Broncos. Petteri Rimpinen, a goaltender. Jonathan Morello out of the OJHL. And Ethan Middlestat, a WHL defenseman. Tampa Bay, we got Felix Lacerte with their first pick at 128 out of the QMJHL. Then we got Carson Pilgrim from U.S. High School. Peter Repsik, a Slovakian player, 19 years old, playing in the QMJHL. Adam Krall, a Czech player, Czech defenseman specifically, and Jesse Heslop from the WHL. Toronto, we got EJ Emery with the first pick. Second pick was Riley Patterson from the Barrie Colts. Then Nicholas Nakiri, defenseman from Finland. Herman Traff, a big power forward from Sweden. William McIsaac, right-handed defenseman from the Portland Winterhawks, or maybe Spokane, actually, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but definitely the WHL. Jan Golsic, a towering Slovenian defenseman from the QMJHL, and Caden Petrie. Then we've got the Utah Hockey Club, who had just a ton of picks, so bear with me here. Berkeley Catton in the first round, Dominic Beninka, a great right-handed defenseman who I've been a fan of this year. Jet Lichenko from the Guelph Storm, kind of a two-way centerman that some people have been higher on than me. Jack Berglund, a good sizey winger from Sweden with good skill. Miguel Marquez, another guy that people have been quite high on that I haven't been as high on from the WHL. Noel Franson, a good puck-moving defenseman. Spencer Gill, right-handed puck-moving defenseman from the QMJHL. Dawson Cowan, good goaltender prospect potentially. Jonas Saarolainen from Finland. Danil Inatsky from Russia. Gustav Sjöqvist, center from Sweden. Niilo-Pekka Muhonen, defenseman from Finland. And Nolan Rod from the USHL. Next up, we've got Vancouver, who I have taking Adam Yako with their first pick in the third round, which would be a good pick because a lot of people do have him projected out a little bit higher. He's a big power forward who, just didn't produce quite at the level that maybe he needed to be a first rounder, but in the second and third round range, that's kind of where I expect him to go. Logan Sawyer from the AJHL. Luke Osborne from the USHL, defenseman. Charlie Serrato, I believe USHL as well, or high school, one of the two, American player. And William Shields from the QMJHL. Vegas, I have taking Artemonov, like we said. Una Väisänen, a defenseman from Finland. We've got Nikita Frolov from Russia and Isaac Bourne, a guy who I thought was going to get drafted last year but did not. So potentially a guy that could still be taken this year. For Washington, we've got Cole Hudson, the puck-moving defenseman, as we mentioned. We have them taking Ryerson Leenders from the Mississauga Steelheads in round number 2. We got Aitos Koivu in the third round, along with Eric Paulson, back-to-back picks. A couple of solid forward options for them in the future. Marcus Kersey, defenseman from the QMJHL. Yamiro Reber, a Swiss forward playing in Sweden. And Andrei Krutov from Russia. And Michael Faranek. And then for the last team here, we got the Winnipeg Jets. Their first pick will be Charlie Ehrlich, 37th overall. Just a big right-handed defenseman who can kind of help to add some physicality and defense to that defensive group. 123rd, we got William Samuelson. Then we got Miles Cooper, Shane Smith, and Callum Hughes. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys liked the picks that I made for your team. If not, add down below what kind of players you hope your team is going to target. And I will be watching the draft in a few days and hoping to see what things I got right, what things I got wrong, and I will be talking about draft grades after that.